being recorded on March the 15th, 2023. I'm Russell Young, and I'm joined by Kale, Cynthia, Evan, and our special guests today are Andrés, Padilla, and Meer. Before we kick off with our special guests, we're going to just go through some of the updates that have happened in Azure over the last couple of weeks. There's quite an awful lot of stuff out there. Evan, do you want to kick off? I see you've got a few in the show.
Yeah, I can go through mine fairly quickly. One of them, so if you use storage accounts, you know that there's the construct of non-zonal redundancy, so local resiliency, and then I think it's geo resiliency. I always forget what the G stands for GRS. But now you can add in zonal, and you can do it right through the portal, right? So super convenient. So you don't. It used to be a lot more complicated. You had to migrate your data and all that kind of stuff. Just made it much easier. The also sort of talking about the migration piece, and I'm a huge fan of the Azure Database Migration Service, right? Because migrating data has always been painful. This service is really handy if you haven't checked it out. But we've now added the ability to migrate all the logins and everything else that come with it, right? It used to be that we just moved the data and then you'd have to recreate, all your permissions and your users and your TDE and whatnot. And it just now it's all built into the service. And then the last one, and this one I had to read it a couple of times to make sure I understood it, but I think it's sort of a remarkable shift in the sort of the way the cost model works. But so traditionally, when you do most transactions in Azure or most consumption in Azure, right? There's have some base number that's free, and then above that you pay, I don't know, some fraction of a penny per transaction. What we've done with standard SSD now is there's a cap, and then anything past that is essentially free transactions, right? So you sort of now it really helps with the planning because you can say, hey, if I don't use up to my, if I'm not using enough to use up to my limit, I can pay just based on what I use. But if I'm a heavy user, now I can predict and say, hey, I'm never going to exceed this number. So we'll include the link, right? Because the math is not super complicated, but again, I had to read it once or twice to make sure I got it right in my head. But it's definitely a step, I think, in the direction of allowing people to plan and understand what their costs are rather than sort of shifting around month to month.
Cool, thank you. I've got a few here. I don't know, Kale and Cynthia, if you've got some as well. If you wanted to come in, I'll kick off with the first one. So ChatGPT obviously taking the world by storm at the moment. Loads and loads of hype, loads of stuff in the news about ChatGPT everywhere. We've got our own Azure OpenAI service, which uses the OpenAI machine learning models on the back end. They're not just machine learning, but they're deep learning, and then you've got other bits on top. But the thing that kind of makes ChatGPT stand out from the others is that conversational AI and the generative natural language that it uses and that model behind it. And that's just now been added to part of the suite for Azure OpenAI. So Azure OpenAI, for those of you that haven't come across it yet, is the ability to use these massive machine learning models within your own subscription, consuming your own data and adding your own flavor of topics and stuff to it. It also supports the image stuff that we've got with DALL-E. So yeah, it's just that way of being able to use your own data and use that power of this next generation of AI that's kind of taken the world by storm. So you can now start to apply, if you think about the logical extension of where this is going with ChatGPT and conversational engines, things like chatbots, which up until present have been fairly dumb, and it's always been coded around expected scenarios that you've programmed it to understand and kind of guide people down. If you start using this new way of working, chatbots themselves just become 100% more engaging because they can search so much more data and really hone in on the information that you're looking for. So we're starting to see all this technology now kind of creep across lots of Microsoft products as well. If you look at Teams Premium now, it's got things like conversation recap in it, splitting conversations up into chapters, automatically taking notes for you that make real sense, capturing actions in meetings, all that kind of stuff really well. And Bing Chat as well. So if you've not tried that as well, really highly urge you to sign up for the preview of that and get on that that program and start using Bing Chat instead of just normal web searches, you'll find it gets you to the information that you need a lot quicker. So that's kind of the big one. There's a lot of other things happening around AI. One of them is the cognitive services. We've had a service around vision for quite some time, being able to understand what's in a picture so it can caption it and describe it and then customize it and so on and so forth. That's always taken quite a large amount of data to train properly to give you really accurate results. You know, we're talking like tens of thousands of images that all have to be tagged and told what they are before you can then start applying the machine learning against new images that come in. That process has all been improved quite dramatically, so that now you can get a much higher quality level with much smaller data sets. So it's got improved learning, improved captioning, improved customization. So that's another good one to go and check out. The only other one I wanted to talk, well, actually there's two. So one was around a thing called Prometheus. So Prometheus kind of works well with Azure Monitor, and it allows you, there's a thing called PromQL, which allows you to query Azure Monitor type data to get some results from it. It's like a nice query language built in there. You can now use PromQL to define alerts that will then show up in the Azure portal. So it works together with Azure Monitor to help you build things like dashboards or rules and alerts that can be enforced through Azure Monitor. And the last one is around App Insights, which has been around for a long time. But if you're still running workloads in IIS and they're .NET workloads and they're running in VMs or VM scale sets, you can now go into the portal and switch on an App Insights extension for those VMs, which will then automatically go and install an agent into that VM and inject it through PowerShell, which will then start instrumenting and documenting that workload that you've got, giving you real good dependency information, performance information, exception data, and all that good stuff tracked back through your App Insights.
Russell, this sounded like, when I saw this sounds like a lot of very similar to what we do with like app services, where you can just check a box and App Insights is in there and you start getting data. It's just now we've extended this to, you know, sort of the random, you know, IIS workload on or ASP.NET or .NET Core workload that's running on a VM. Is that the right way to think about it?
I think so. I think instead of you having to open up that app and go and rebuild it with the right instrumentation in it to call the SDK, it's going to inject it for you and do it. But being able to do it directly from the portal as well, just by ticking something on, just simplifies that whole process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kale, I see you've been working in real time.
Yeah, no worries. Just one thing I wanted to comment on the AI stuff is next week is the NVIDIA's GTC conference. That's in towards Silicon Valley. I don't know if that's an in-person event now, but there's definitely online. So anybody who wants to attend that, you can do it online. You don't have to go anywhere. That's March 20th and to the 23rd. There's always good stuff there for new AI technology. Microsoft will have a big presence there around Azure AI and all the different services we have to help in that space, and as well as our partnerships with NVIDIA and stuff. So just a call out there for folks, because we're close to that time. So if you want to attend that event, we have a blog post. We'll drop it in the notes.
And then I have one more around Azure Data Manager for agriculture. I remember a while ago we had the people on the show about farm beats, where they're really collecting a lot of data around soil, around like satellite images on how we can actually utilize these information to make the agricultural process more efficient, and especially going towards the goal of sustainability, which has been a big focus for Microsoft. So now it's available as a service as part of the Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, which there's a lot of different industry-specific data connectors and capabilities. And if you're into any sort of agriculture business, definitely try it out.
Cool. Well, that's enough time talking between ourselves. Let's hand over, and Meer, if I can ask you to introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meer. I'm one of the principal customer engineer in our Fast Track for Azure team, focusing on data and AI areas, helping our customers onboarding their AI-focused solutions in Azure. It's been a while that I'm working with the customers, both within the Fast Track as part of the CXP org, as well as outside of Fast Track. I've been working with Evan for a long time. We go for long days, but that's me helping the customers every day, bringing their solutions, AI-focused solutions to Azure. You talked about OpenAI. This is a great focus for us right now. It's just helping them basically realizing the values of OpenAI, for example. But that's where I play with, and I'm an AI category lead for our Fast Track team. I work with Andrés, partnering with different scenarios. This is one of the scenarios that we'll be talking about. I'll let Andrés give the introduction on it, and they'll talk about it. That's me.
Thank you. And Andrés?
Hey, Russell, it's good to be here. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Andrés Padilla. I'm also a principal engineer on the Fast Track data team. So my wheelhouse and where I live in AI, edge, IoT, some analytics, but that's where my bread and butter is. And we've been working with Meer for some time. We're in quotes, we're as thick as thieves. So working on these engagements, and we're really glad that what we're going to talk about right now, our drone edge AI initiative, fits in nicely with the topic today. But great to be here, Russell.
Yeah, thank you. Fantastic. And yeah, it feels like AI has been a topic that we've been talking about for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
And it's been promising a lot. And yes, it has been delivering a lot, but last few months with the advent of OpenAI, everything just seems to have exploded. And
exactly, yeah.
And people now really are fearful for the future in terms of, when are the robots going to take over? Because some of the responses you get from some of these chat GPT and stuff is incredible. So yeah, lovely to have you on the show, and really looking forward to hearing what you've got to tell us about drones and so on.
If it makes 60 minutes, right? It's a thing now, right? So.
Well, you guys are in the spotlight now because you're the brains behind it, all this stuff. So yeah, hopefully, give us some insight.
I'll take the first minute or two, Meer, to introduce it. So a little backstory to context. About a year ago, we came upon a company called Drone Express, and they came to us and they said, "Hey, can you help us develop a model that can help us land the drones and do deliveries?" They're actually one of the few companies that are on the verge of getting FAA approved for without line of sight deliveries with drones. So we said, definitely, let's jump into this, and we went hand in hand with them for about a year, helping them get into Azure, what it is to deploy, leverage IoT Hub, device provisioning service, and then ML Studio to train their model, do instance segmentation, retrain it, and that whole pipeline of how do all our services interplay nicely together with it. And obviously within there's the know-how and the best practices and guidance of trying to transmit the Drone Express performance model, model packaging. How do we land it on an NVIDIA device? Could we leverage the deep stream pipeline for these types of scenarios? And along the way, what we realize is that, one, there are other companies in drones or in autonomous systems that have a headache, or there are bottlenecks that they acquire in interconnecting all these services, the packaging, the optimization, picking the right model, what else? The data collection, retraining, creating the MLOps lifecycle, device selection, camera selection, and what to use on the edge. How do I, grab an RTSP feed it in, do some inference right there on the edge, and then maybe package it or hold it on a device. And if not, let's stream it up to the cloud. And then lo and behold, we've done the analysis that there's a lot of other customers that are on the edge that want help breaking through these hills and these mountains, of making sure that I can get to production much quicker. And that's what we're all about. Anything I missed, Meer?
Yeah, no, I think you summarized very well. I think one thing that I want to add is that while we are working with customers like Drone Express, right, but we also have customers in Asia region doing the same, or not only Asia region, EMEA and Asia, both regions doing the similar, almost like deploying at the edge solutions for different types of data models. I think that's where Fast Track team shines in, is helping the customer going to the hoops of how to set up the edge, how to train the model and deploy the model, and almost like an end-to-end process. How can we simplify that process for them? And this is what we are taking as a challenge of helping those type of customer scenarios, onboarding their models into the edge and realizing the value of edge AI for that matter. I think that's what I just wanted to add on top of what Andrés explained in our great scenario that we had. Go ahead, Kelly.
Go ahead, Kel.
Oh, I saw Cynthia raise her hand first there. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, I thought you'd. Okay, I'll ask my question. I'm curious, Andres and Meer, when you're working with customers, what are the parts of implementation that they want a lot of control or a lot of inputs into, and what are the parts that they heavily rely on the Azure as a platform?
That's a good question. It varies. They want help with scalability. They definitely need help with scalability. And how do I massively deploy this to not just one drone or one device or one robot or one edge device? Is how do I deploy this? And then how do I quickly retrain a model when we start seeing drift? They need help in those scenarios. They also need advice in the areas of packaging it appropriately, whether an Onyx file, how do I bring in OpenCV into the mix if I'm landing it in Intel devices. And I've seen that they need help with the on the edge device. How do I, if I have any custom, pipelines within the edge device, how do I pass a stream or a message from one module to another? And that's where we're seeing a lot of the workloads, at least what I've gathered in the last year and a half.
What I can add is from the control perspective, the process-wise, they want to control the process. For example, okay, how do I automate the end-to-end process through the MLOps? But then, in terms of how can we secure my deployment, how can I take advantage of monitoring aspects from within the platform itself? For example, Azure ML, right? I have a model. I deploy the model. The model will perform better or worse over time because of the changes of the data. That's the part they want to get more insights on from within the platform itself. Security-wise, how can I make sure the models are highly secured, and not only in terms of who has access to it, but also in terms of code-wise, the platform can tell us, hey, your code has rogue code inside on it. So model will probably not be deployed, even they try to deploy it if it has a rogue code on it, right? That kind of control they want from within the platform, but the process-wise, how to deploy it, who is involved, those are the things that they want to control themselves. Just wanted to add.
Yeah. Along with that, probably just like tailing onto that, like, yeah, there's this whole part of like, how do I deploy this stuff? How do I scale fast and do all those kind of things you just mentioned? But then I can imagine on the back end, like back at the data layer, like kind of thing, that data probably piles up quite a bit. And, whether it be log data or actual telemetry data, all kinds of stuff coming in there. And I can imagine that's a nightmare after, running this for 6 months or a year or something, of saying, how do I manage this now? Because that's going to be expensive and I need to be able to like contain that. So is that, I assume that's a huge part of that too, not just the monitoring to make sure things, but like how do you scale the back end, like.
Absolutely. And speaking of data, what also comes into play is analyzing data, preparing the data for the model to be trained on, right? That part is along the line of how I manage the data, which part of the data that I can then take off of my 6 months worth of data, which I retrain the model on so that I have the latest model that can reflect on the accuracy of what we're trying to achieve through the model implementation, right? That's definitely very, very true in the overall end-to-end journey.
Let's take one. Oh, sorry, Russell, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, Andreas, you mentioned earlier on retrain the models when we see drift, and you've talked about retraining the models quite a bit. Is that one of the, I mean, when I think about drones that are using flight, you've got the problem of the 3D, but it seems far simpler than drones that maybe have to drive around the streets, navigate various other obstacles and stuff like that. What's the drift issue that you're talking about, and what are the challenges that you see different in flying drones versus land-based drones?
Great question, Russell. So in terms of drift, what we see is the landscape could change. They'll develop a model depending on season, mountainous regions, flat regions, urban areas. So that is, and grabbing the data and the images or the video in order to train the model, that's where that comes in. Will the landscape always be consistent? No, it will never be consistent. You're going to obviously find different, a model will have to be trained, or you'll have a different model for Florida versus what you're doing in Ohio, or, during the snowy season, or it could be raining. It could be raining and misting. And then in terms of what we're seeing in the differences for drones, you have to fly. Obviously, you have to. There's the flight capabilities of the drone. Now you have a moving machine that weighs quite a bit, and you have to not only make sure that the drone is maneuverable, makes the right decision as close to real time, so that if a child comes out of nowhere, if a dog comes out of nowhere, a car comes out of nowhere, the drone can react appropriately, either to lift back off or come back down. Now, in my opinion, I think those are much simpler scenarios to handle than when you're on a street, or when you're driving a car. Now you have children, and you have to be much more reactive, and the car has to be have a lot of safety protocols built into it. But for drones, I find that the major things it has to do is, for deliveries, as of right now, is choose an appropriate landing zone. Monitor if, for a moment or two, hover for about, 30 seconds, a minute before it actually makes a decision. So you do have some time. And if there are if there is a moment in that space, in that range of time, that something does happen, the drone is actually quite capable of lifting back off and coming back to the home. And if it loses connection, their companies are building into it, say, hey, I'm out of range, I can't talk to you, I don't have any internet connection, and I don't have a precise enough response in my inference to tell me it's safe to land or deliver. If those cases happen, then the drone will obviously come back and come back to home base and won't make the delivery. For autonomous systems cars, a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but I can imagine also that the power lines, for instance, are kind of critical, right? To make sure we avoid, and all those kind of pieces. And maybe that's easy, but it seems like that would be a complex problem to kind of figure out, especially if you have workers doing stuff. That's kind of dynamic, so you're getting closer to what happens on the road, kind of thing.
Well said, Kel. Yeah, you start venturing into the area of, you're doing initially some static inference, and then you want to work your way into doing dynamic inference as close to, real time as possible. And with that, then you start leaning into what type of device can I put on a drone or an autonomous system that's hardy enough that can have a GPU capabilities to give me split second, inference. And that's where we start leaning in on Intel devices, NVIDIA devices, and those types of Orin and Xavier's, because they have the firepower behind the scenes to make that.
Just wanted to add that that's the other piece in terms of controlling the security of the device. itself, as far as who can get access to, I mean, in terms of writing back to the device itself when you're just deploying it, who has access to. That's the other part they want to have control on. Maybe because through the process itself, or maybe some other ways of, who can get access, who can write to, versus just reading from it in terms of inferencing, or in terms of any other purpose for that matter. That also came into the picture when we've been working with this joint project. Sure.
I'm going to ask two questions together because Evan had to drop, but could you all tell us a little bit about what Azure ML is as a service? And then the follow-up question to that is, how do you see the line drawn between machine learning and AI? Because I feel like a lot of times we use these two terms interchangeably, but fundamentally they may or may not be the same.
Valid question. Andrés,
I'll
you wanna
go with that.
Sure.
I'll give you my interpretation. My description of Azure ML and what we have is we have an environment that lets you juggle a number of balls in the air quite seamlessly. You're going to have to juggle you need compute in order to make a prediction. Gives you that. You need to train a model with compute. It gives you the ability to create jobs, experiments. It gives you that. It also gives you the ability to bring in data. You need data, images, text, unstructured data, and being able to manage that pipeline of bringing in data or curating the data and having access to it. It gives you that. It gives you the ability to create specific environments. When you're training a model, you need to, you'll have dependencies, PySpark, TensorFlow, NumPy, certain SDKs for the SDK version 1 for Azure ML or the SDK version 2 for Azure ML. And you might want to have to install, you're going to have to install those on a particular compute. And you can say, you know what, I want to install those dependencies. And then last but not least, the model. The model is your final bread and butter. It's what makes you your money. You get to wrap versioning around that model. You get to house it in a registry, and you get to have the ability to deploy it to endpoints. I need to put that model into action. Well, I want to be able to deploy it on a web API, a container, a Kubernetes cluster, an edge device. It also gives me that ability. Anything I missed there, Meer?
Oh, you summarized it very, very well. I mean, to me, I try to explain in one line. Okay, so Azure ML is a service, is a PaaS service that is one-stop shop for your end-to-end lifecycle for doing the machine learning activities. So creating a machine learning solution to solve any specific problem that you have with your data. So that's how I try to explain it. And then, of course, you basically gave all the other details that we need to share because that's what we have as an offering.
Real quick on that. So like should customers and people using this think about it like it's kind of an abstraction away from like the compute you mentioned, the data you used to mention. So there's a PaaS service helping us with the ML portion, but there's like raw stuff we need here like compute and storage and stuff like that. And we can basically choose whatever we want. You mentioned Kubernetes. I'm sure you use SQL Server and all kinds of other things inside of there. So should we think about it that way? It's like very abstract for those pieces. You can kind of plug in what you want there,
Absolutely. You said it very well. It's basically, the way we have it is that you have your choice of what data you want to work on, what computer you want to work on. We facilitated that features built into the platform so that you bring in just the model, and then we provide you the way of working with different data of your choice, or deploying to a different target of your choice, be it AKS, be it managed platform where your inferencing endpoint is running, and you can just send the data the way you want to. In fact, you can even just develop the model and then they take the code and deploy it the way you want to, just like the way you have it in open source world, right? Or if you want to work with services like, and I'm gonna leverage Spark cluster for my inferencing, you can do that. So we have given a choice. We created the platform in such a way that choice of accessing different types of data, working with different types of compute, as well as leveraging curated environments for your model training, or create your own environment for that matter. So it made that very, very simple for in my view.
Kind
I
of
think
follow up
Cynthia had one more
question.
question.
Oh yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
ask about the difference or where the line ends or draws between machine learning and AI. But follow-up question to the Azure ML. If I have a lot of data and I want to do some machine learning, do I need to know what model that I want to use to train my model? Or does Azure ML also help me choose that? Like, do I go with linear regression? Do I go with random forest? Or is that something that Azure ML will say this is probably the best way to go with?
Great question. Ideally, from your data, you know the pattern, and knowing the domain that you're playing with your data, you also know what problem it can solve, and you also know that, okay, so this is the algorithm that I select to to basically create a model that will solve my problem. So Azure machine learning as a service doesn't give you that direct answer. Rather, it facilitates you to go through some, like, for example, you can just take advantage of AutoML or Designer, knowing that, okay, I have some data. Let me see if I can use, clustering, or I can use the classification model, linear regression model, through the AutoML process to get an idea what your model is telling you, what problem it can solve through the algorithm that they're selecting. But ideally, that's the exercise that you go through when you look into your data, see what pattern it is telling you. So you talked about the machine learning versus AI. AI is the generic branch, right? Machine learning, on the other hand, is that you give a set of data, you know the patterns based on what data is telling us. If I have a credit card information for my customers, or the transactions, if the credit card is charged in Italy, and the person who owns the credit card is sitting in America right now, it's a pattern that you can find out. Okay, so there's definitely something this data is telling me. Azure ML, machine learning, not Azure ML specific, machine learning will help you understanding that patterns that you can identify and figure out a solution for it through the machine learning algorithm that you select. Azure ML has a AutoML process that helps you going through that fast phase. Okay, so this is the problem that I can solve from my data using this algorithm. Once you have that idea, you can take it to the next level. Russell.
Yeah, thank you. That's really good. Just trying to understand. We talked about OpenAI earlier on in the session and in the intro. Is OpenAI something you're also looking to adopt as part of your project, or is it something you're already using?
Absolutely.
And how is it helping? What are you doing with it?
So first of all, of course, right now, some problems that we are seeing our customers trying to solve are along the line of ChatGPT, like chatbot style of applications. So I want to have a question answer type of application for my department where we have to automate certain process. Call center is another example we're looking at, where we can take advantage of the OpenAI, basically scenarios where we have a document, we want to get the insights from the document. We crack the document, we read the document into and get the information on. We want to leverage the ChatGPT to build something intelligent in our application that we can just sort through those data or the form that we have with that we cracked. So absolutely, we're looking at the OpenAI wholeheartedly, because that's very very promising model or set of models that our customers are looking at. They have questions. We're trying to sort through their questions, trying to answer what scenarios they can leverage it, and how we can help them going through the initial phases of, okay, I don't understand this, I don't understand this, how do I leverage this, what like, for example, tokens. How do I need to think about tokens? For example, prompt engineering. How do I go about having basically great prompt engineering, getting the great results off of my data? So going through this initial phases of understanding the promises and the realizing the value through the implementation. We're walking through them in the phases.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Oh, and just one more quickly on the kind of the AI stuff that's available now. That vision piece that I spoke about right at the start, where it's the model's been improved so that you're getting a higher quality with lower amount of learning going in. Is that something that you'll also benefit from in the drone scenario, for example? And do you kind of automatically get those incremental updates as they happen? Does that happen somehow, or do you have to rebuild and restart from scratch with training a new kind of, or deploying new models and all the rest of it?
No, Russell, I think you wouldn't have to, I mean, for drones, you wouldn't necessarily at this point in time need to recreate too much of that pipeline. When the data comes in, the images will vary. So it's just a matter of creating a data set and retraining a new model with a new data set at this moment in time for drone scenarios. Now, will that evolve to include 3D images, 3D cameras? Sure, that will evolve later on. But as right now, we're looking at more two-dimensional, images for, hey, can we land on this particular driveway? And taking pictures from 400 feet up and drawing a polygon around appropriate landing sites and delivery sites. Now, where that will vary in the future is that as a drone starts to come down, the drone will want to do some inference in 3D and see, is there anything coming out of left field that they didn't expect, and does it look unusual or not? And if it does look unusual, the GPU would say, hey, I don't feel right about this. Let's go back up in altitude. So we'll vary with 3D cameras.
Yeah, one last question to kind of wrap up here is like, for our listeners here, how do they get started with this, right? Is there like a kind of a portal they can go to that like has a bunch of kind of links or spiders off? Because there's a lot of stuff here, right? There's a lot of data stuff, compute things. You talked about device stuff, a lot of pieces, right? And I'm sure people who are plugged into that space are in various pieces there. But like from an Azure perspective, is there like a portal, or is there some place we could direct our users to say, here's kind of how you get started, or here's the menu of all the things we have over here,
Is it
Great question, Hill.
for...
And go ahead, Meer.
Go ahead.
So that's one of actually the bottlenecks that customers are seeing, is that there's no really one-stop shop where I can go and learn all this. You have to know the IoT side of it. You have to know the ML Studio side of it and know how to apply that. We are building an ML Edge training pack that's coming out, rather in the next 2-3 months, and where you will be able to leverage all our know-how and know where to get started. But yes, if you wanted to get started right now, you would have to, for the scalability, go and read up on IoT Hub and device provisioning services. You would have to read up on the machine learning side. How do I create a simple vision AI model? And then finally start to get familiar with Open, Onyx and, OpenVINO. Then after that, you probably have to start to get familiar with IoT Edge. What are those capabilities? How do I move RTSP feeds, cameras? So there is right now no real one-stop shop, but we're getting close. We're going to get there.
Yeah, no worries. And if there's any helpful links you guys can share, like we can share with our listeners, like I know there's not just one, but if there's a few that are like super important or something, feel free to share them and we'll share them with our listeners,
Yeah, it'd be particularly good to be able to read some more about the drone scenarios as well. I for one, would like to do some more reading on that and see when I'm going to expect a drone to drop out of the sky near me here in the UK at some point.
You should just ask Chat. You should just ask ChatGPT. It'll tell you. Don't worry.
I'll tell you. Only has information till 2022, 2021.
I think it's 21, isn't it? But I think Bing is a little bit more up to date.
Correct.
on the Bing chat. So I think that's pretty current. I asked it some stuff about the current tennis that's going on, and it seemed to know pretty much what's going on there, and the UK budget, which happened today as well, and it was up to speed with that. So all pretty good. Not that I spend all day just asking ChatGPT stuff. You understand. Thanks very much, you two. It's been great having you on the show. Thank you very much for all the insight and information. Yeah, we look forward to reading your resources and links and hearing from you in the future.
Thank you very much, Russell and Kale and Cynthia for having us, and even for sure. Thank you, Andres. Good to be here.
Thank you to you guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.